Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining on the Markeisha Hall podcast. I'm your host, Markeisha Hall, and I have my old friend, feels like we're old friends.
Of course we are.
Yes, and Aaron Wright, and we just are going to hop into the conversation that we were already having on special education and just access to education and really come out with a plan how we're going to get this train on the track,
Right.
or moving, really,
Right.
for some change.
Yeah. Or just get on the train.
Get on the train.
Right. Figure out how to get on it. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just want to say at the outset, we were talking earlier, and I want to make it clear to everybody, because I think that parents kind of get typecast, right? We get kind of shoved into a certain box, and they're looked at in a certain light. I value what teachers bring. You're right. With your history, your experience, what it's like being a teacher in these situations where the parents, and maybe the parents aren't engaged, maybe the parents aren't there, and there are educational issues or developmental issues going on with the child. So what it's like being on that side of the table, and what it's like advocating for children on that side of the table. So I really do value what teachers bring to this. And I sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but I really don't think that we are on different sides. I think we're both on the same side of the issue, which is the child side of the issue. It's just that we are stuck in this system that was created, by design, and whether that design was intentional to this end or not, and this is just a byproduct of it. But unfortunately, we're placed almost at odds. And it can feel like an us versus them battle.
Right.
But if we're going to try and get that train moving, if we're going to try and get on it, I think there needs to be some basic understanding that teachers and parents are on the same side of this issue.
Right.
In a lot of ways, parents have a difficult time because we are constantly kind of advocating and fighting and pushing against the system.
Right.
Teachers, too, I think, find themselves in a really difficult spot because not only do you want to be there for your child and advocate for them and help these parents understand what the process works or how it works and what they need to do, what their rights are, the steps they should take to engage the IEP process. But they're also having to push back potentially against their boss, right? Yeah. So you might have a principal or a superintendent who's really budget conscious. Or they themselves might not know how the system and laws work. Right. And so the teacher then finds themselves in this really kind of precarious position, especially if they're not, tenured and their position isn't necessarily secured for either this year or the following year or for the next 10, 12 years. So I really think the first step in a lot of getting that train moving is an open dialogue between parents and teachers. And how do you establish that trust? Because it can be really difficult, I think.
Yeah. I'm just shaking my head because when I was in the classroom, that is exactly how I felt. And I know that I'm not in the classroom anymore, and I am a parent, and I'm talking to parents, not to the exclusion of teachers, but just because it's so much harder on this side. Like, I could get choked up right now just thinking about our first week of school and the things that I had to do. And it's just exhausting. And I know, and he has a good team and his teachers are willing, but they don't have the tools that they need or the support, not like support from the administration. Our administration at his school is amazing too, but they don't have enough tools, enough people, or enough to
right. No, and
they want to.
Yeah. And if you think about all the different ways in which disability presents, right? I don't think that teachers, certainly administrators, have that exposure or that kind of access to understanding how best to support these children.
Right.
And so I think, and if you're interacting with somebody whose ego might be fragile, right, they might take real personal offense to what you're trying to bring. forward, which might be a legitimate safety concern, right?
Yeah.
Or a legitimate educational concern.
Right.
But I think this last, we talked earlier, I kind of hope, like I have this, I don't know why I always do, but I always feel like there's this hope, or there's this one thing that we can point to.
Right.
I think this last year, or year and a half really, has exposed kind of the general American public to how difficult life can be,
Right.
and how impactful, and not a positive way, lack of access to an education can be, right? So that if you are not properly supported, and for so many families this last year and a half, Zoom school didn't cut it.
Right.
And the mental health effects that go along with not being able to physically interact and be supported by teachers.
Right.
So I kind of really hope that maybe there's a recognition there that, this needs to be looked at across the spectrum, right? Whether you're able or disabled, this is I think a universal issue, is that if you don't have access, there's a lot of untoward effects.
Right. Well, just the history of the school system, it wasn't meant to have this many kids, like when it first started. I think that's what it was. It was one teacher and just a handful of kids, which works out great. The less students there are, then the easier it is to address each child concern. As our population grew and grew and grew, the school system, general ed, and then eventually special ed, because there wasn't even special education initially, the system didn't grow to accommodate that. So now where you used to have, like in the schoolhouse, like one teacher and a handful of students, now you have one teacher, 30 students, and then you have what we know to be different types of learning styles, different disabilities in that classroom. We have all of these different things but the original system hasn't been revamped.
No, and there's a history of the methodologies of teaching, right? Like very top down, paternalistic. I'm telling you, this is how you learn. I think that's one column or one framework, and then there's the very real history of our children. If our kids were born 40, 50 years ago, they wouldn't necessarily be allowed into school, and certainly children of color. Up until 1954, right? You weren't lawfully, you were allowed to be excluded from public education, or at least integrated public education. So it's, we've never been there, right? We've never been to a place where integration and inclusion worked.
Right.
I think the more kind of noise and exposure we provide to it, the more light we shed on it, the more we can inch along and move that train forward. But education has never worked for what is a large group of people, right? It's only kind of been what has worked has only kind of been tailored to a small, elite, typically white, typically male group, because that was who our society put forward as important.
Yes.
So it's tough. Parents are fighting against not only a one-on-one in the moment system, but they're fighting a history of just non-inclusion.
Right. And changing that is, I feel like, personally, I was exhausted last week. But since I know both sides, I dust myself off and put together. But I know a lot of parents aren't in the place to fight for their kids and then fight for the bigger cause.
Right.
And I'm not saying fight, like people think like that's negative, like but we're just saying like literally my child deserves to have the way that he learns addressed, so that he can show he has a lot of things on the inside of him. He has to show it in a different way. It's not he's not writing 5-paragraph essays, but he's a great storyteller.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So we have to not ding him for that writing piece, and really respect and honor that he's like, oh, this is a great story, and find a way to talk to text or different things in the classroom that honestly, some teachers just aren't aware of it. Even though I was a special education teacher, the things that I'm still learning to this day, I just be like, I could have did that for my student. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have done a lot more. I
Right.
feel like I did a lot, but it wasn't like you teach special education and they say, oh, here's training on AAC and here's a slant board. This is what all these things I learned really from a parent telling me, like adaptive scissors. That just blew my mind when I was like, what are these?
Right.
I had no clue until a parent said that they used it in an outside therapy when I was teaching. And I was like, went to the judge, we had them in storage or wherever they got them for them. But since I didn't request them because I didn't know to request them, they were just in storage.
Right.
And that's the problem that, that I have. And I feel like that's when teachers get like, oh my gosh, I feel them when they're saying that. Like, I just didn't know. Now that I know that there's adaptive scissors, well, that opened up a whole nother access to, I taught preschool. So scissor skills was a big thing because we did.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah.
Yep. And being able to just do this instead of putting both your hands in there when you're already having OT issues was a game changer. They got to participate in the craft section portion of the day.
Yeah.
Where before it would just be us doing it for them, cutting it out and just kind of hand over hand, which I'm learning about that too, right? Consent and all these things that I'm learning about and trying to get other teachers, like, it's not against them either. I literally didn't know. If I did, I would have done things better.
Right. But they got to experience success, right? Because of that access, and that success begets success. It's, it's, as you're talking, it's interesting, the idea of a special education teacher versus the regular or gen ed teacher. Talk about this in a couple different forums, but it's tough to see somebody with a disability or see somebody who's disabled. Sorry, I'm using the wrong language. If you don't see them, if they're not there. Yeah. So the fact that there are almost two separate, parallel, separate and not equal educational systems for disabled children has long-lasting impacts. Yeah. I didn't get to grow up, when I went to school, elementary school, public elementary school, even, all the way through high school, disabled children, if they were in my classroom, they weren't supported in the way that I think we think of supporting someone now, or they were functionally removed. I mean, they were actually educated in a different classroom, cohorted together. Their meal times were specifically separated from everybody else's. So really, there was just this complete blind spot when it comes to disabled children. And so when you grow up, and then as an adult, if you don't have that exposure, you actually don't see them. It doesn't cross your mind. You wouldn't, if they were using adaptive scissors, I would have no clue that product existed, right? Because it's just not there. So I think when you kind of bring that all back to even those early elementary classrooms, if there's no kind of cross-pollination, if there's no integration, if there's no bringing together of the regular or general education teacher and the special education teacher, if those classrooms don't overlap, and there's no kind of access point for exposure, and I don't mean just exposure for that disabled child, exposure for the children and the parents and the teachers and all the other educators of non-disabled children, you're not going to see yourself as an integrated community. And then it's going to be really hard for those people to have empathy about, well, how can I help you access your education? So it's tough. It's tough to push back and fight with somebody if you've broken bread with them, right? So if you've sat down at that table and you've had a meal, it's really hard to say, no, I don't. We're not going to do this for your child. We're not going to support your child. But if you have, if those parents have had that child over for a play date, or those children have been allowed to do whatever together at that same educational table, and those teachers have been there supporting both children, it's tough to say no, and it's tough to pull that away. And then it just becomes integrated. It becomes natural. It becomes part of what the fabric of a classroom looks like.
Right.
But the fact that, and again, this comes back to our, what we opened with, we're fighting a system. Mm-hmm. We're not fighting people, and the system has separated us.
Yes.
And the system has kept, disabled children really out of the mainstream and out of quote unquote normal or regular education. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're fighting against. So to bring it back to the original point, we're not fighting individual teachers. I don't have any vendettas against individual administrators or superintendents, but what the system has set up, puts you in charge of administrating, a classroom or a school that really isn't integrated and really doesn't work for my child. And I've got to figure out a way to make it work for them, because the consequences to that are huge, whether they're mental health issues, whether it's, the ultimate high school graduation rate, which, is directly related to whether or not they're going to be able to get a job or go to college post, high school graduation. So we know this innately as parents, but I don't know that the system and the people involved with us know that, because they haven't had our shared experience.
Right.
So as much as we can bring them in and have that community, I think again, to bring it back to the train, I think that will help as many people as we can get on that train that don't look like us, mm-hmm. the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely. And I think about, because I use my son, that he's in a general ed class with RSP, speech, and OT supports. Last week was tough. Yesterday was tough. And I was like, am I making the right decision? Maybe I should put him somewhere where there would be more support, maybe more support. But then I was thinking, well, that's not, and that, we don't know. It's only been a week of school, but it was really tough on me to watch him struggle, when we do have things set up for him and we still have to tweak it. Right. But then I was thinking about, like you said, like Ruby Bridges, like her mom must have just felt, I feel like that, not that he's Ruby Bridges, but parents are afraid to put their kids also in there to be like maybe the poster child for like inclusion at the thing, but someone had to do it.
It's a legitimate fear.
Yes.
Right? Because putting them in.
Yes.
Because people have compartmentalized and siloed thinking. Putting them in means that in some people's minds, that means not supporting them.
Right.
Right. So I think there's a real difference between, pull out services, whether you're in a resource room or some sort of other supportive environment, versus being in the regular classroom. But if you're in that regular classroom unsupported, that's not the least restrictive environment.
Right.
In fact, that's a more restrictive environment.
Right.
So if you're going to have that child in the regular classroom, which they should have every right to be there, and the other children should have every right to see that child there, mm-hmm. they still have to be supported, right? So those services that are happening in that resource room really shouldn't be any different because they happen to be in the regular classroom.
Right.
They should carry over.
Right.
I think those are some of the misnomers, right? And the lack of training that, your principal or your administrators or your school psychologists, your teachers don't have that awareness. They think, okay, location determines services, but it really shouldn't.
Right.
Right.
And seeing those things, I'm gonna tell a little secret, but I don't work for a district.
Tell them all.
I don't work for the district anymore. So and what I'm seeing is, and what I've done also as a teacher, because that's the way that they told me not told me, but showed me how to do it. Like there's goal banks. So ashamed, Aaron.
No, it's okay.
Goal banks. And so when I see my son's thing, and I know that it's from a goal bank because out here we use SACE, they use their thing. I'm like, now I used to do this also. So I'm not like point wagging the finger. It was the way that I was taught to do it. But those goals and getting his teachers, like this is real life journey for me right now, doesn't work like that in the classroom. You know what I mean? Like the goals from the goal bank don't necessarily fit the way that it says it doesn't fit. So that's why we're tweaking what I even thought was going to be a good goal when we, did his triannual last year. But now that he's in the classroom, I'm like that's not gonna, that doesn't work.
No, they're not individualized.
It's not individualized, and I feel like the conversation around the support and the access is that it's okay to tweak it. Like we're not saying like you made a sucky goal, or even if you got it from a goal bank, even if it started from there, we're just saying like, well, that doesn't work, so let's tweak it. And that's hard. It's a hard corner for some of the people working with our kids to turn, because they're used to kind of the IEP being once a year. We met for the IEP meeting, and then you're going to get the progress reports, hopefully, because that's a thing, right? And then we'll meet again next year. And here we are trying to say like, well, hey, that's not working out the way we saw it in real time. Now it looks good on paper, but in the classroom during the day, that's not working out. So can we tweak it? Then everyone's like, oh, what? Then they're like,
a lot of resistance. Yeah.
No, she's coming back.
Right. Because they're just trying to check the box.
Yes.
They're just trying to if I'm going to extend grace, I can appreciate that the IEP process, as exhausting as it is for parents, I imagine is equally exhausting for teachers, right? Who have to figure out how to get classroom coverage during whatever the meeting is, right? And if you kind of have to repeatedly come back to something that you thought maybe you'd worked out, that can be tiring. I can appreciate that, but exactly what you're saying, right? If you design goals, or you pulled something out of a generic data bank to insert in there, and it's just not working, like this is the way the system is supposed to work. The way the system, you're supposed to call an IEP meeting, right? And you're supposed to say this just isn't working.
Right.
Why should you have to flail and fail through a year's worth of bad decision making, back in August or September, right? When the system actually, though, if you're going to point to the positives in the system, you should be able to call a meeting and sit down and say, this is not working. We need to be able to revamp it.
Because it was good intentions. I said yes to those goals, actually. But he had not been in school. He went from preschool to pandemic to first grade. Right.
You didn't have data. You didn't have data. You didn't have.
Yeah, these look good. And now we're in the classroom. Even a weekend, I'm like, this is not, good. Meeting with his teacher and being in the classroom environment and just looking around, be like, some things that wouldn't bother another student, like he gets really cold, but he's not able to, he won't tell you that he's cold. Like his little feet will be cold, and I'll be like, babe, go get some socks. And he'll be like, oh yeah, I'll get socks. So they'll be freezing though. So I was like, oh, he was trying to tell me something. And I looked up to where his seat was, and he's right by the vent. So the air is definitely blowing on. So that throws him off. That just throw him off every single day. And sometimes it's little tweaks like seating that a teacher wouldn't know, because he's not saying that he's cold. But me being able to look into his environment and be like, we need to make this accommodation. And not just in this classroom. If he goes to PE or they go to the library throughout the day, we need to make sure that something as small as the air being on him can disrupt his whole day. But it is an easy tweak to like an easy accommodation or modification to what needs to be in to follow him throughout the whole day. Right. And
that's not hard. That's not difficult.
Not hard, right.
But it is hard if they don't see you as a person.
Right.
They don't see your child as a person.
Right.
Right. Then it becomes, what is his mother asking for again?
Right.
Right.
We have to do this every time he goes, make sure he's sitting.
Right. Here she comes. Right. Always in the principal's office, always complaining.
Right.
So I really think this is where those relationships become critical.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to build that, seeing eye to eye, so that they do see you as another member of the classroom community,
Right.
as opposed to, well, this is just the kid that comes into my classroom for a couple hours a day, but most of the time he's in the resource room,
Right.
right? So not seeing them as an other, but seeing them as a member of, and belonging to this classroom community. It's tough. That's a big, it's actually, it's, like we were saying earlier, we're fighting a mountain of history.
It's tough, but you got to
do it.
Some action steps. I'm always encouraging parents to not to be best friends. There's tons of teachers that might have, all my kids have had, that I've been like giving the side eye to, but that's the world, right? And we have to, see how we can deal with it. You don't have to be best friends with all your kids' teachers. You don't always have to go have Starbucks together, or you have to bring them gifts and exchange anything, but professionalism and the well-being of your child in school. Right. So it's not like when we're talking about relationships, it's not like, oh, hey, Aaron, my kid's teacher, let's go have a Starbucks. Right. But it is just a mutual respect that I'm going to listen to what you're going to say in the classroom too. Because sometimes parents do this also. I'm talking about myself also. And I'll be like, oh, he just doesn't like that because he has sensory issues. But it could be really that he just doesn't like salad. Like my husband doesn't like guacamole. Right. I don't know. If I would have known that before we got married, I don't know that we would have gotten married. But he doesn't like guacamole.
You called it off.
Right. Yeah. That's a big deal. But you know what I'm saying? Like sometimes it's other people see things in our kids that we don't. So they were like, no, he's just being a 7-year-old or 6-year-old. He's not 7 yet. He keeps telling me he's 7. He's just being a 6-year-old. Like, no, he was fine. He was playing with the whole time. And then he just got mad because we had to put it away or something, like just being a 6-year-old. And so I want to listen to the teacher too. Like, it's not always something that has to be addressed at an IEP. It could just be his personality coming out. He's interacting with different friends. It doesn't always have to be about his disability. So you want to listen to the teachers too and how their day and program's going. At the same token, listening to the parents and how their day is outside of school is important. And when I was talking to his teacher and saying, well, yeah, you saw him do great all day. Great. And then he came home and started pulling his hair and just out, unregulated for the rest of the day. And I can't figure out what's going on. Then that's what happened during the day is affecting him for the rest of his day and into the next day. Right. So listening to what tweaks that we can make throughout the day, it could be simple and it doesn't have to be like relation. We don't have to be best friends. And for me to hear what you're saying, how he's doing what he's doing in the classroom, and what I'm saying, how that affects the rest of his day at home, and getting to see you as a family. Like I have other kids too. We need to get to these things also, or we have a dog, or it just helps her communicate with him and see us as a whole, as a family. He's a part of a family and a part of a community.
No, totally agree. And some of those you don't have to be best friends. No. Like you're saying, you don't have to have Starbucks together. Mm-hmm. I do think there is value in a couple things. One, having a conversation outside of an IEP meeting, right? If it's going to be your long-term teacher, whatever that relationship is that you think is kind of going to be really one of those crucial relationships throughout the year, where you can just kind of have a sit-down conversation and depersonalize it, right? Don't make anything about the teacher, right? And in fact, if you can, use that opportunity to say, look, I really respect what you do. Mm-hmm. You bring a lot to the classroom. Your knowledge and your history of teaching for me is really valuable as a parent.
Right.
And try and again, see them as a person, right?
Right.
And let them know that I'm appreciative of what you're bringing to this classroom and what you can do, and what you're doing for my child.
Right.
Sometimes I think having those conversations outside of an IEP take the heat.
Yes.
out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you see them on campus, you can always kind of wave and smile, and it does start to personalize you a little bit. So when you have these conversations about, socks or sitting next to vents or any of that kind of stuff, it softens it, right? And it makes it less personal against them.
Absolutely.
And more of a shared caring about their student.
Right.
But no, it's tough. It's not easy. And not everybody's built for having these conversations with, with teachers. So I think folks like you and I are probably in unique situations, right? We're used to it, right? We're on campus and engaged in whatever way we're doing it. And that's just not how a lot of parents are built or wired, or even have the time or wherewithal.
Right. There's so many things that go to. I think having older kids too, and I'm sure you see this on Insta too. We have older kids, so they weren't on IEP, but I know that going into the classroom and doing all those things, definitely different. When I had my first, I was kind of like, you're just a new parent. And you're like, oh, my baby's going to kindergarten. They're going to go to school. And then you'd be like, oh, PTA. Oh, you can volunteer in the classroom. And so then the next kid, is you get better. Each kid, you just know more because it's we'll have a new shared experience with our kids going to college. We never had a kid going to college before, man.
It's gonna be
a good year. But when that second one goes to college, then we'll be like, oh yeah, those ones.
Got it.
Okay, got it.
Right.
Check. We'll know what, we were trying to figure out acronyms, and there's a lot of special education acronyms. There's college acronyms also. And we were trying to figure out FYJ. So we're Googling because we're trying to figure out, I don't know what that means. First year journey. Something that they do at their school. We're like, I don't know. And that's how parents with IEPs were like, we're throwing out the terms and learning new things. And
we were lucky in that our first right kind of trailblazed for us a lot of that stuff, and gave us opportunities because we weren't on IEPs or any of that stuff with him, and so we were just having conversations with teachers.
Right, we were just having conversations.
You were building those relationships.
Yes.
And it's just to look back at it now, it's just so funny that those relationships kind of get broken when you bring that special ed component into that relationship, because it puts everybody.
Yes, it does.
Everybody kind of jumps back a little bit, like, oh, well, if I say something, is it going to be bad? Is it going to be against me? Is it am I saying something that I shouldn't? Am I saying something my principal's not going to agree with? Right. And it's just that whole, again, the system. It is almost designed to ruin our relationship with teachers. Right.
Well, it's been fun.
I love talking to you. I can do it all day.
We do a monthly.
We should.
A monthly chit chat. We should go live more or podcast more. Because I really want to. Maybe we could work together and put kind of a action plan, because we're action-led people. So I don't like to complain about it. I want to.
Let's do something about it.
Encourage parents to, and not just special ed parents, because it can't just be, right? It just can't be us. Mm-hmm. We're already having a lot of things. We got to start talking as our community to the larger community, so they can see. And that's why I think it's important. That's why I talk about inclusion. It's important for us as a family, and right now it is an appropriate placement for him to be in the general ed setting, because the conversations that I'm having with his teachers and some of his classmates that we, walk around and they like, hey, Josiah, and hey, is important for them to have and to see in order to make
literally, it's just to see
adjustment. You can't do it, like you say, you can't do it if you can't see him. It's just going to be a goal or something on paper, and then when you put it into reality, you're like, yeah. So
no, let's create action plans. Let's do it.
Let's a little action plan for the school year. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, thank you. I love talking to you.
And I will see you on the gram. Tell Lisa and the family I said hello.
I will. I will.
Okay.
Absolutely. All
All
right.
right.
Take
Thank you.
care. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.